In 2024, I completed my RYA Yachtmaster Ocean. Today, I want to tell you about my experience, about the exam, my qualifying passage, and all the details. And of course, in the end of the video, I will share how much did it cost for me. So, to get an Ocean Master, you need to have RYA or MCA Yachtmaster Offshore. You need to complete a qualifying passage, and the exam consists of oral exam and written exam. So, I will start with theory. I bought a theory with Yachtmaster Offshore as a package. It was online school Keepers Online. I studied for, I would say, about 3 months. Theory is mostly about celestial navigation. There are also a few lessons about ocean current, weather patterns in the ocean, the hurricanes, also about safety of the boat, communication, managing the crew, all these details that you need to know before departing on the ocean passage. First, I studied the lessons of communication, safety and weather, because at the time I didn't need the sextant, and then all the other lessons about celestial navigation, they go in order. I bought the sextant and I studied celestial navigation lessons. It's a challenging topic. It's mostly about math, calculating, looking for right numbers in the tables, so it requires a lot of practicing and understanding the whole process. It took me a while. I started really slowly and I needed to watch first lessons a couple of times to understand. Even though the narrator was really clear and the explanation was really good, still there are so many details that you need to sometimes watch it a couple of times to understand. I would recommend not to go to the next lesson until you fully understood what you have listened already, because later it would be more confusing and more questions. So make sure that you understand everything in this lesson and then go to the next one. After each lesson there are exercises and they actually make a lot of difference. When you do calculations by yourself, you start to understand better where you're supposed to look, what you're supposed to do in what sequence, and all these details are important. I didn't complete exercises with my first try, and even with not second one. It took me many times to do the same exercise to understand where I did a mistake, what I missed, because if you even confused one number, instead of 2 you put 1, it makes a huge difference and the result will not be correct. So it's really important that everything is correct, every single number, every single that you looked at the right table, that you chose minus or plus. That's a lot to remember, a lot to understand. But even though when I couldn't manage the exercises, I knew the basics, I knew the whole process. But time to time I still did mistakes in my numbers. I knew where to look, I knew the formulas, but sometimes I just didn't use calculator because this was so easy to calculate in my head, and that's where I made a mistake really easily. I continued watch lesson by lesson, of course, with the whole understanding of each one. I left the exercises for last, repeated every exercise again and again and again many times until the whole process has become automatic for me. I knew exactly on what page to look, what table to use, and what formula to use. At the end, I didn't have any mistakes. That's really important to practice as much as possible. Even if you're sure everything is correct, do it again and again and again until you know it's automatic for you and you don't need to think about it. You just look there, look at this table, look at this formula, use that, use this. Something like that. The theory course was clear, well explained, and with time I understood everything. The only thing was missing for me that there wasn't any topic about significant damage on a boat, like dismast scene or losing a steering, something like that. So I would recommend to do research more about this topic. It's not in the theory course, but the examiner will ask you that. And also the weather. They explain the basic, the ocean currents and the weather patterns in the ocean, but I would say there's still more details that you could know, so maybe do a little bit more research about weather as well. It would be useful for the exam. Written exam. I did my written exam before the qualifying passage, but at the time my qualifying passage was already planned. For the written exam, you need to find a school where an instructor will supervise you while you're doing this exam. I found one on Mallorca, and that's where I did it. It included celestial navigation, of course, an exercise where you need to find your position from 3 taken sites. I did it with no problems at all. It was the easiest part actually for me because, as I said, I did so many times. Also, there was weather. You need to explain some weather patterns. For example, I was asked what is the current in the Gibraltar, how it works, and what the best time to cross the Gibraltar. If I remember right, I actually did a mistake there because I confused some things. Also, they ask about safety on the boat and what paperwork you should have on boat. On that, I would recommend just remember the list. Qualifying passage. That's the most challenging part of the whole process of getting Ocean Master. What you need to do for qualifying passage, it should be at least 600 miles, with at least 200 miles more than 50 miles from shore or any navigational aids. My qualifying passage was from Gibraltar to the Canaries. It was a little bit more than 600 miles and around 96 hours, which is a requirement also. You need to take full part of preparation the boat before the passage, checking all the systems, preparing spares, provisions, fuel, water. If you're not a skipper on the boat, at least you need to know what exactly is happening with all this provisioning, and you need to help making lists, checking the tools. Also, you need to be independent, you need to take decisions, you need to act like you're a skipper or at least first mate. The last, the most important one, during the whole passage, you need to use celestial navigation. No electronics allowed, so you just use your sextant, tables, and you calculate and find your position all the time during the whole passage. That's the requirements for the qualifying passage. Obviously, for the qualifying passage, you need a sextant and a boat. So I'll start with sextant. I bought a sextant 4 times before I got the right one. It was not the best experience for me. The sextant that I don't recommend to buy, it's Tamaya, because it's like a souvenir, it doesn't work, and usually they deliver it from India. What I recommend, the cheapest option that actually works, that's Davis Mark 15. That's what I got. I will share the price in the end of the video. It works. It's a plastic one, but it takes the size and give you the degrees. The problem is sometimes the plastic ones are not accurate, just slightly. So if you want a really good sextant with accurate sights, you need to spend much more money. It depends on your goals, and if you're gonna use it on more ocean passages, then maybe it's worth it. So it's up to you, but I used Davis Mark 15, which worked good enough for me. It wasn't accurate because of the adjustment on the sextant, but I will tell about it later. The boat. It's much easier to complete the qualifying passage if you have already a boat, and most people do that with their own boats. Other options, you just need to find another boat, join the crew, and be a first mate there. I also heard there are options that you pay money for the organization, and a boat gathers students that want to take this qualifying passage. I know there's a school in Australia like that. In Euro, I didn't find any, but maybe there are options. Just needs more research. What I did, I followed Facebook groups with sailing communities. Time to time I was checking the boats that doing passages with more than 600 miles. At some point I found a boat. There was a couple that was doing Atlantic crossing, and at the time they were cruising in the Mediterranean. They offered me to help them from Mallorca to Gibraltar and from Gibraltar to the Canaries. It worked out really well because my written exam was already in Mallorca. The passage from Mallorca to Gibraltar wasn't the qualifying passage. I used it as a practicing. I'm really glad that I did this passage because I realized how hard it is actually to take sights on the water while you're sailing, because before that I was practicing on land, and it's a really big difference. I did many mistakes on my sights, so I needed to adjust the sextant. There are a couple of adjustments that actually affect your result. So I did that and it was better, but still there were some mistakes. But I was practicing again, taking sights, did my calculations, taking a log, just preparing my routine to understand what my routine will be on the qualifying passage. And that was really important because I just knew what to expect. I would recommend to do the same. Do some practicing before the qualifying passage while you sail on a sailing boat. This way you understand what do you need to work on for the qualifying passage. In Gibraltar, I took the part in preparing the boat, checking the conditions, the systems. We did provisioning together, and I made a list of all tools and spares that we had on board. And also, of course, I prepared the passage planning with refugee ports, with expected weather, wind, and also pilotage plans from Gibraltar and pilotage plan to Marina at Lanzarote Island in the Canaries. We needed to wait for a week for the right wind because the wind wasn't really favorable and there were like some hurricanes in the northern Atlantic Ocean. So we were just waiting for the right weather, and it made me a bit nervous because my oral exam with the examiner was already planned in a week or so. I really needed to start this passage now, otherwise I would need to postpone and rebook my exam. Luckily, we went out on time and my qualifying passage started in Gibraltar. We crossed the Gibraltar Strait. The whole passage took us 4 days. We arrived on Lanzarote and we anchored in one of the bays. During these 4 days of passage, I needed to make a routine of my sights. I had a couple of options. Sometimes I took morning sight, then meridian passage. Sometimes meridian passage, then afternoon sight. Every day I tried to take sights of stars at dusk and dawn, and planets as well at dusk and dawn, and the moon as well. Taking the sights, doing calculations and plotting it all on the chart took most of my time. I was always busy and I didn't even have time to read a book or something, so you won't be bored on this passage. Taking sights was challenging because the boat was obviously moving, and because of the ocean waves I needed to take a couple of sights and find the average. Also, when the boat is heeling, you need to also calculate the arrow above the water level. The results of my sights were not perfect. In each sight, when I found my position eventually, there was always around 8-15 miles of difference. I didn't use the electronics, but I used navionics to check myself. Comparing it to navionics, it was always a few miles of difference between my position and the position that I found with the sextant. In the ocean it's not a big deal, but it's better, of course, if it's more accurate. The only correct position that I found was my last sight on the planet Venus. It was exactly the position that I was at the moment. So I guess it takes time to get used to this and understand how the sextant works, find the arrows in your calculations, all the details with more practicing. And another recommendation, if you always have with you Greenwich Meridian time, it's gonna be easier for you. Another detail, we finished our passage at anchorage in one of the bays, which is in real life, it's not a problem, but for the exam, you need to finish in the marina. I didn't know that. When I was on my exam, I was telling about my passage and I said I finished in this bay and an anchorage, and the examiner said for RYA you always need to finish in the marina. How I found an examiner for my oral exam and final exam? I contacted some RYA schools in Spain, because I was in Spain at the time, was asking them do they have examiners to accept my exam. The school said no, they don't have any, but they gave me a contact of an available examiner that lived in Spain. It would be more convenient for me to go to Spain and pass my exam there rather than go to England or some other places where most likely there are more examiners, but it would cost me more just for the flights and all this organization. I found this examiner. I got contact from one of the RYA schools, and I contacted him and we agreed about a date, time. It was on weekends. I needed to go to his house where I would have my exam. The exam. What we started with, he asked me to tell about my passage, how did it go, what I did on it, how was the preparation, what was the weather, how I organized everything, and I told everything about the passage, the routine, all possible details that I could think of. Then he started asking questions about my sites, checking my calculations, if they were right, and he didn't like some numbers from the sextant because I figured that it wasn't well adjusted. Before taking sites, make sure that your sextant is well adjusted. Ask someone to help you with that. Later, after he checked all my calculations, he asked how do I use sextant, and I showed him. I just took my sextant in hand and showed how I took a sight of the sun or other celestial bodies. He told me a really curious thing, that some people don't pass the exam because they don't know how to use a sextant. When they sail in a group of students that all go for qualifying passage, usually one person takes sides and all others are doing their calculations based on this one side. So do it by yourself, do all the process from adjusting the sextant, taking the sides, calculations and plotting on the chart plotter by yourself. You're allowed to make mistakes, but it's important if it's your mistakes, not someone else's. After that, he asked me about weather in the ocean, how the hurricanes move, how they form, some ocean currents, safety on the boat, organizing team watch system, duties for every crew member, just asking me what would I do if I'm a skipper on an ocean passage. And the last thing was significant damage on the boat, like dismasting, losing steering, and some other problems. Most of these questions I didn't answer because I wasn't prepared. I answered what I knew, it wasn't much. Still, I passed because the most important thing about Yachtmaster Ocean is to show that you are able to find your position without electronic devices, that you can be in the middle of the ocean and you know what to do. That's what the examiner looks at. If he understands that you know how the celestial navigation works, what you need to do, how you work with the sextant and tables, then you will be fine. And of course, other things you also need to know, but the focus is on the astronavigation. And the cost of RYA Yachtmaster Ocean. I bought the theory in a package of Yachtmaster Ocean, so altogether it was $600. If you buy it on the Yachtmaster Ocean, it will cost around $300. The sextant costed me $240, Davis Mark 15. Ocean theory exam 75, that's the one that I organized on Mallorca. Provisional on the qualifying passage, so the food that I paid for. On the passage it was $160. It was the arrangement between me and the skipper. There was no contribution on the boat, but I paid for my own food, which was $160. The final exam, oral exam, $229. This is pretty much it. Overall impression about the studying and exams. It was definitely difficult. There was like a lot of confusion and took me time to understand the astronavigation, but it was very interesting and I was invested in every lesson. When you understand what to do, you become really good at it. You actually enjoy the process. Of course, when you make an everyday routine on the boat, it's not that fun anymore, because you need to take sights every day and you just get tired with some time. But still, it's a really important skill to have, I think. If you sail in the ocean, it's quite essential, because if something goes wrong on the boat, you always know how to solve the problem. So if you plan doing some ocean passages, I would highly recommend to do this course. And of course, I will attach all the links below the video, and you can always contact me for more questions, and I will be happy to help you.